just want to make sure. Thank you.
Yes. So we'll start off our event. Our first talk tonight will be from Amber Kidwell, getting started with Angular. In this lightning talk, Amber will discuss what Angular is, why to choose it, and demo how to get a new project up and running. If you're a new developer, fresh out of bootcamp, or even an experienced developer looking to try something new, this might just be the talk for you. All right. Also Amber, forgot to say her role. Amber is an application analyst and developer at Great American Insurance Group. And with that, we will pass it over to Amber. I'll give you control.
Okay, sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute there. Alrighty, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Alrighty, here we go. Take it easy on me, guys. This is my first talk. So, as Alex said, first, thanks, Alex. And as Alex said, I'll be talking about an intro to Angular. So let's jump right on in. On the agenda, we'll be talking. I'll just give a brief introduction about myself. Talk about what is Angular, why Angular, getting started with Angular. I'm gonna do a little quick demo. I don't got much time because this is only 15 minutes, but I would like to do that. And then we'll save some time at the end for questions. I'm not sure, do we usually save all the questions for at the very end or for at the end of each speaker, Sierra, or does anybody know?
Sometime after each speaker.
After each speaker, okay, great. So that will be that. So with that, let's talk about myself. I'm an application analyst and developer at Great American Insurance. I have been a full-time developer for about 3 years now. And I used Angular in my coding bootcamp as our capstone project. And now I use it every single day on the enterprise level. And I just want to point out, I am not an expert at all, but I am comfortable enough in my experience and my knowledge, and I actually enjoy Angular. So my goal is to just maybe, hopefully, give somebody confidence or inspire someone to take that leap into learning Angular. So what is Angular? So first, I'll just say, Angular was released back in 2010. It was called Angular JS then, but they've now dropped the JS, so just Angular now, but you might hear both terms being used. So just FYI there. So Angular is a component-based framework used for building web apps, and it's using TypeScript. And since it's a component-based framework, that means the components are the building blocks that compose the application. Side note, there are other component-based libraries as well. Angular is not the only one by any means, so I do want to take a look at one of those later on in the slides. Angular is also a suite of dev tools which allow you to test, debug, and build code. So simply put, Angular is a library and packages that we use to create our own custom applications. Next, well, we talked about it being a component-based framework. And so if it's the building block, I think we should talk about what a component is. So components have these 3 things, just minimum. They can have more, but these are the 3 things that they're going to always have. And that will be a TypeScript class that defines the behavior, an HTML template that declares what's rendered on the page, and a CSS class that obviously defines the styling of it. So let's take a look at one of these components. Okay, so I don't know how to move this thing. Sorry guys, you can't really see the top. I guess it doesn't matter though. So first you'll see the imports. That's nothing special. But what is special is you'll see this @component sign, and we call that the component decorator. And in that component decorator, you have a selector. So the selector is what is used to identify each component in the component tree. So that kind of tells the application what component it is. Then you got the template URL, which is just your HTML file, and then obviously the style URLs, which is your CSS. And then you'll see you have your class declaration and implements on init. And this on init is actually one of Angular's lifecycle hooks. And it's so common that when you use the Angular CLI or the command line interface, which I'll talk about that a little bit later. But when you use it, when you use the CLI to generate a component, it will automatically just include this ng-on in it because it's just a very common lifecycle hook. So, and talking about the CLI, you'll see right here, here is an example of one of the commands that you can use. So you have ng, that's for Angular, the G, which means generate, and then component, obviously we're generating a component, and then the name of the component. And so what the CLI command does is it creates all your files and updates a file. So let's look at some of these. So it creates your HTML file, obviously. It creates that TSS file we talked about and the CSS files. Those three main things that we talked about on the last slide. And then it also creates, which is really cool, it creates the testing file for you. So this spec file, that's your testing file. You can use that to run unit tests on. And then finally, it updates your module file. And so what the module file is, like when you generate a component, every component lives in a module. And if you don't include the component in your module, then it's not going to compile correctly. So using the CLI updates this file for you automatically, kind of taking out some of that boilerplate code that you would have to do normally. And I also just wanted to point out on this, if you noticed, I included my file explorer over here, and I did that for a reason. I kind of wanted to just point out some of the things that Angular offers, which is really cool. So you see we have guards, you'll see a resolver here, routing, and obviously services. So I just like that it's obviously it's just a file name, but it kind of shows you some of the things that Angular offers. Like I said before, there are other component-based libraries that people use to build apps. And of course, one of those are React, right? So a lot of people seem to have experience or have at least heard of Angular or React. So I thought that it would be beneficial to kind of discuss the differences between the two. And again, I'm not an expert. These are what I found when I was doing some React projects on my own. I've never done React on the enterprise level, but when I was doing some projects for myself in React, these are the main differences that I noticed that I wanted to talk about. So first, React is just, and I'm using just in quotes because it's a beast, but it's just a JavaScript library, whereas Angular is a full-fledged, complete MVC framework, right? So for React, you'll be downloading a lot of different tools and more libraries that might come standard in Angular, which that gives you more flexibility using React versus Angular. It's a little bit more rigid and not as flexible as far as third-party libraries and things like that go. Next is data binding. This was one that immediately stood out to me. Angular has two-way data binding, where React has one-way data binding, and that's just kind of your flow of data. So Angular, if you update it on the UI, it gets updated in the component and vice versa. React doesn't have that like baked into it, and I'm not a React expert, but I know that there's a way that you can mimic the two-way binding, but it's not as seamless as it is in Angular. Next is the written in. So React is written in JavaScript, Angular is written in TypeScript. So I like TypeScript better. That's why I like Angular. I like it because it's strongly typed, and I come from a Java and C# background. So using JavaScript is not as natural to me, but if you have a ton of experience in JavaScript, maybe React is a good choice for you. And finally, testing and debugging, which is probably the biggest glaring difference to me. I pretty much don't do anything unless I'm in debug mode because I'm like the breakpoint queen. And so Angular, it is extremely easy to test and debug, whereas I know with React, you have to download different tools in order to do that. So those were just kind of some of the differences. I just wanted to put that in context if somebody has different experiences with React or whatever. So next, all right, so Amber, we talked about the differences and the big similarity, but this talk is about Angular. So, why should we pick Angular? Okay, so these are just my opinions, and here we go. First, it's supported by Google. I'm a huge Google person. I'm an Android person. Not that that matters, but I just really love Google products. So Angular being supported by Google is a big plus to me. It's scalable. Like I said, I did it in boot camp with a teeny tiny capstone project, and now I use it on an enterprise level where we're developing very complex insurance apps. It's an in-demand skill. You can basically go to most job descriptions or job, whatever, like job, when they're looking for somebody, why can't a job ad? And usually they're going to say experience in Angular or React, right? So it's an in-demand skill. So why not learn it, It's a huge community. You can go to their GitHub or Stack Overflow and their documentation, and there's just so much out there that you're not like siloed off and nobody's going to be there to help you. There are so many people out there to help you, and I really like that aspect of it. Like I said, easy testing and debugging. I'm a tester, I'm a debugger. I love all testing. I'm weird like that, I guess. So that to me is a huge advantage. And the CLI, I love being able to type like 4 things and it generates all of my files and folders and different things for me. I think that CLI is an extremely, extremely powerful tool and asset that Angular has. And there's much more. Obviously, I'm not going to get into all those, but so next, almost out of time. So next, let's get, if you were to, the hardest part for me about doing stuff at home or doing something that's new is like, where do I even begin? So this is kind of the things that you're going to need to do first. And you're going to need to download the latest version of Node. You're going to want to install the NPM package manager. And then you'll also need to install the CLI. I'm going to kind of do a quick demo over this, and then an IDE. So no, I know technically IDEs are not required, but I will die on that hill that I'll always use an IDE. So just throwing that out there. So with that being said, let me show you a quick, hold on, if I can, let me show you, oh no, I'm trying to figure out, sorry. Oh, okay, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, good. Okay, so as you can see here, so basically what I wanted to do was be able to show you how quick this took me 5 minutes to get this project up and running. So first what I did, I went to my file explorer, created a, just went to my file explorer, created an empty folder called Angular demo. Then I opened up my IDE and navigated to that folder. Okay, then I did npm. So at this point, I've already got Node and the npm package manager installed. So now I'm on to like that 3rd step. So I'm in this Angular demo folder. Now I just typed in npm install -g Angular. So this is installing the Angular CLI that I talked so much about. And then that took maybe a minute to do. And then I went down here and just wrote ngn my new app. So that's just Angular generating literally a new Angular project for you. It asks you 2 questions. I should have typed yes, but I don't know why I didn't. I just clicked the wrong button, but it should be yes, and then CSS. And this took about 3 minutes for it to generate this entire project. And I didn't have enough time to like sit through all this, so I just kind of did it in advance. But these are just the steps that I took, and this literally only took me about 5 minutes. So then I changed directory to my new app because that is now the Angular app. And then I just typed in ng-serv-o, right? So then when I did ng-serv-o, it pops this up. This is it. This is the app that I created just by doing these little couple things. That's it. It's really not that hard and scary once you get the download. I think that the hardest part is downloading stuff. So what I wanted to do quickly now is kind of, I talked about two-way data binding, and this is one of my favorite features. So I just want to show you this really quick, and then I'll stop. Then I'll be about done. Oh, these things are in my way. Okay. So we talked about two-way data binding. So if you look here in the app component HTML, in the app HTML, I'm sorry, you'll see this, it's interpolation of the title. So basically this title is being pulled from the TS file, the TypeScript file. So if you look over here on our app, you see my new app is running, right? So all you have to do then is do hello, and then this title is going to be interpolated, and then this, which is really cool, this is another feature of Angular. It does ahead of time compilation. So you notice that I did not have to stop and rebuild, right? It just automatically recompiles it for you and updates your UI. I spelled hello wrong, but now you see that that title says hello. And it's vice versa. So if there was a field here, I could update this and my component values would be updated as well. So that's what I wanted to demo and just show you how easy it is to really get started. And really, if I just want to take this whole thing out and just do blah, 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 then I'll just show you one more time. It automatically compiles, it automatically re-updates your view. So I just love that. I'm almost done, guys. I don't think that I'm running over on time. If I am, just yell at me. Alrighty, so what's next? I would highly, highly, highly suggest completing this tour of Heroes tutorial, or if you want to do your own thing, just follow that as a guide. You can add in some advanced Angular stuff there, add in some unit testing, basic security, whatever. And if you really want to get, like I said this, I said, if you're feeling froggy, I said that in one of my practice runs, and that got a little chuckle. So anyways, if you're feeling froggy, create your own little backend. Create some CRUDs on your APIs of choice and connect it all together and have your Angular call the API, then we'll fetch that data from the backend. Like, there's so many steps, and this is your project, so take as much time as you need. You don't got a project manager or anybody, yelling at you for a deadline. So just take your time and have fun with it. So in summary, Angular is a powerful framework that is used to build applications of all sizes and types. It's component-based, it's not going anywhere, and in my opinion, it's a good framework to add to your technology tool belt. So that's it. I did it. Any questions, guys or ladies or anybody?
Yay, congrats, Amber, on your first talk.
Yay. Trying to figure out how to get back to the, there we go. So I don't think I went over in time. I was a little worried about that, but if there's any questions, if not, that's cool too. You did a really good job.
I'm not seeing any questions here in the chat, but I do have a question while we're waiting for others to come in. So with Angular, it seems like a lot of the tools that you use are already built in once you, I guess, create a new project with using the CLI. As far as like managing state for the application, are there any like tools outside of Angular that you reach for? So like a Redux or what else? GraphQL, Apollo, sorry.
I never have. I think that the state manager, don't quote me on this, but I've never had to do anything like that. And I don't think anybody on our team's ever had to. And I think Emily, maybe if she's here, she might be able to answer better than me, but I don't think that you have to pull in any extra libraries or tools to do that. I think that is also baked in. I could be wrong, but I recalled on a piece of something we were working on for work that involved that, and we were able to just use what Angular had available. But that doesn't mean that you can't use other tools or libraries. Might be a little bit cumbersome to implement them, but I'm not 100% sure. And if anybody maybe knows better than I, then feel free to jump in.
Emily, I'm not sure if you're trying to talk, but your picture just came up.
Yes, Emily said she uses RxJS. That's what we use too. I think, right? That's what we use at Great American. Yeah. I think that's what it's called, anyways. Oh gosh, not my.
Awesome. Okay. Do we have any more questions?
It looked like Jill asked a question in the chat too.
Oh, I missed it. We have a question from Jill. Is there a source you like to preset style templates, or you like for presetting style templates?
Me personally, no. We don't do anything with like preset style templates at where I'm at. Yeah, Angular material. Yeah, we don't even use Angular material at Great American. I fought tooth and nail to get us to use Angular mat, but they wouldn't. So we just use everything like basic Bootstrap but yeah, like Emily said, Angular material. Yeah, absolutely.
I have less of a question and more of a comment that I use React a lot, and we have a lot of Angular legacy code. And watching your presentation has made me realize that I don't not like Angular. I just don't like legacy code. So I'm interested in playing with Angular now.
Good. I'm glad. That was my goal, to get somebody inspired. So I love Angular. It's really, truly a joy for me every day at work to get to do it and learn something new. So
Yeah, it looks awesome. Thanks for doing that.
Any other questions? All right, with that, we'll move on to our next talk. So this next talk is from Emily Hundley. She's a digital marketing manager at Cerkl. So here's her the talk bio. Phrases that sabotage your swag. Not that it's new to anyone attending, but it's difficult working in a male-dominated field. What's even more frustrating, that you're doing a verbal dance and using phrases that shrink your confidence. This lo-fi presentation will cover 10 words in your daily lexicon that aren't helping you move forward, and replications that will help you evolve into your baddest business self. Okay.
Can you tell that I'm in marketing?
Yes, you showed us.
It's like I went way too hard in the paint on that, on that copy. Sorry again if my cat in the last presentation was a distraction to anybody. He just woke up from a nap, Beans. And so he is extra super like cuddly right now. So just wanted to set that up before launching in. Yeah, so I'm in marketing. My presentation is not as technical as what you're used to, but I'm super excited about talking about it. I'm glad, because he's really annoying and he might try to sit up, pop up on my lap in this presentation. I'm sitting, so it would make him uncomfortable if he'd get off, but here we go. We'll find out. All right. We good? Okay, awesome. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about 10 things that are sabotaging your swag. A really vague title that's about something that we probably go through every day, which is taking away and diminishing your own power by doing actions or using phrases that you don't necessarily know are harming you. So why would I do this? Great question. I became a hype woman when I went to an all-girls high school and then joined a sorority in college. I was always surrounded by awesome, powerful women who, like, when we all hung out together, they would go for leadership positions they would have never tried for, or felt really comfortable voicing all of their opinions. But then I was also in business school and was one of 6 women in class. And I could see some of the same women from those groups kind of not even speak up to challenge a frat boy on a project disagreement. So I went into tech, absolutely ecstatic, because I work at Cerkl. There's Rachel in the middle there. Hey, Rachel. A lot of really awesome, badass women, but even now, we have all started to recognize in each other and in ourselves that we still diminish our own swag when it comes to presenting team meetings or asking questions or pitching new ideas. So the entire goal of this presentation isn't that you change everything that you're doing. It's so at the end of the presentation, you'll at least notice some of these tendencies in yourself, and you'll start to hear a little bit from that career coach from the back of your mind. It's like, hey, do you really need that many exclamation points? Who knows? All right, also to get all this information, I knocked on all the women's schools at Cerkl, which was awesome. I used a ton of TikTok, great information, good content. And I had to go through my own Slack messages, which was absolutely cringy. I saw my own obscene amount of exclamation points and my own amount of belittling and kind of softening myself so that I could talk to like my male counterparts, especially because I work directly for the CEO. So, alrighty, let's get into it. The first one I came up with when I was thinking about this presentation was "I believe." It's a really small phrase that I feel like I personally use quite often. Instead of taking something that I know, I try to soften myself and say, I believe that that might be the right solution, or I believe we should probably look into this more, instead of being a quick switch with I know. It's small, it's minute, but it's one of those things that's what got me to start noticing all of these other swag diminishing moves. Maybe we should. A double whammy. Maybe and should, way too not confident. I mean, maybe we should reschedule this conversation for next week, or maybe we should follow up on that instead of just switching it out with I recommend. Oh my gosh, suddenly it's like you're in charge. I recommend that we schedule an appointment about this next week. Whoa, yeah, it's a hard hitter, just a quick switch. So I've been talking about a lot of things that are you belittling yourself, but there's also a really shitty other side to things, which is coming off as too aggressive and being labeled as bitchy. So some of these phrases are things that you can rephrase that aren't going to diminish your power, but also couldn't come across as aggressive. Like, going forward, I would like this to be done. Can sound a little harsh when you can switch it out to how about trying. Sounds more collaborative. It has the exact same goal in mind, but it more starts a conversation than dictating. Same with does this make sense? Can be harsh, not only for the person that's involved, like, oh, you can't assume that they've caught up to you, but also you're diminishing yourself. What, are you speaking gibberish? It totally does make sense. But don't belittle yourself if you feel like somebody else hasn't caught on to your wavelength or you haven't communicated in the correct way yet. So switch that out to are you following me? To just open collaboration and have a pausing point in the conversation so you can know you're on the same page. I'm no expert. I know, Amber, it's fine. You said it in the presentation, and I was like, oh no, she said one of the things on my slide. I swear I'm not gonna out her. So in context of at your own employment, a lot of people already know what your level of expertise is. So by saying I'm no expert, you're already knocking yourself down a peg. When everybody else in the room pretty much already knows where you're at. So instead of saying I'm no expert, go with I think. Just take that off the table and go straight for what you know to contribute your part of the conversation. Oh, I got a slide. Ooh, there it is. Okay. Sorry, man. In my personal life, in my professional life, I tend to apologize for everything. Whether I haven't hit the mark on a project, or even if I'm suggesting an edit to somebody else's, I'll first apologize before saying what I actually think or feel. So instead of, which is so funny because I'll think of, all the salespeople I work with every day, and I think I've heard them apologize twice. I gotta make this shift to let me ask this. So this can work in both of those situations. If you haven't hit the mark, let me ask this: how could I have better prepared for this meeting? Or let me ask this: how could I have better presented this project? That way you're not looking at yourself and automatically counting it off as a failure, but you're turning that into a learning experience, which is beneficial for everybody involved. When it comes to asking a question, just feel okay to ask. You don't have to apologize for voicing your opinion. That's why they brought it to you in the first place. By the way, this Pokemon's called a Jigglypuff, for all of you who are Pokemon fans out there. It's probably the funniest name for a Pokemon I've found yet, and it makes me giggle every time I see it. This one's a two-parter. So, punctuation, whether it's together or it's separate, punctuation, we tend to overuse our exclamation points and question marks. I got a Slack the other day. It was 4 sentences, and 3 out of 4 of those sentences had exclamation points at the end, and it was somebody just asking me to respond to an email. And I responded, please God, do not send me that many exclamation points again. Just ask me, Emma, can you reply to that email? And I'll say, yeah, no need. We overuse it quite often, especially to soften ourselves when we're asking for somebody to help us with something, or to, hey, how was your weekend? I have this request for you. Would it work? Can I throw a time on your calendar? If you don't have the exclamation point every time. When it's together, it can come off as aggressive. And trust me, almost nothing is as important as 3 exclamation points back to back that couldn't just be like bolded, or everybody knows it's important. So instead of, clumping them together to try to showcase power, it really comes off as showing off and kind of has a negative connotation. And as it comes for the amount that you use in like paragraph form, just try to cut back. Start to notice when you're doing it. Start replacing them with periods. What do you think? So this one, it's not really from a point of collaboration. It's more of a point of when you are completing a project, especially when you're collaborating with other departments or people in your department, or you have to show your manager your new one. What do you think shouldn't be what you ask at the beginning of the project? Switch it over and becoming a little bit more proactive. Your answer should be, is there anything that I'm missing? So you're going to take a project, or you're going to take an idea as far as you can get it without collaborating, and then bringing it to the table and saying, hey, all right, what am I missing from this? What can you contribute? Did I miss the mark on something? It shows you being a little more proactive and like you are in charge of that. It really shows an in-charge attitude. There's nothing more frustrating to a manager when they feel like they have to hold your hand constantly when they hired you for a second set. So it's just a nice switch. All right, this is the last one, and it's the one we've all seen. It's all happened to us. It's all, whether it's happened to us or you've seen somebody else it went down with, saying nothing when someone else claims an idea. I mean, months ago, you might have mentioned, we should really go after this strategy. And then it kind of gets shrugged off. And a couple months later, suddenly it's like the new to do. So instead of finger pointing or, talking behind backs or anything like that, there's a really simple phrase that you can use in a meeting when it happens to you and when it's happening to your peers. And that's, wow, I'm so glad that you echoed so-and-so's idea. Can't wait to get a meeting on the calendar to talk about it. Or, oh man, I'm so glad you echoed my idea. I really have a lot of notes on this. I would love to chat about it more. Do you have any time? Just a really quick switch that, I mean, makes a really powerful impact. All right, my final wish for this presentation, once again, wasn't that it changes everything you do. It's so that during this presentation, at some point, you either related to one of the phrases or you started thinking of other things that you do daily that are popping up left and right. Like, oh man, I put emojis at the end of my request, Sandy. I put emojis at the end of my request so that it softens it and people know that I'm not being bitchy with a smiley face. So, and you just start to notice it, and it's something you continue to notice and you can correct. You don't have to soften yourself, and you're losing your swag, you're diminishing your power, and you don't have to do it. So, quick some follow-up resources for you if you're interested in tactics that I've used in order to continue to not, react when I have my career coach kind of nagging me in the back of my brain. Is one, Grammarly has a fantastic plugin for your email. It will tell you not only, you're using a lot of punctuation here, it's more, hey, here's the tone that your message conveys. It can come off as aggressive. It can come off as immediate, urgent. It can come off as friendly. So you know what the person receiving it, especially in today's, virtual world when you can't like jump on a horn with somebody, or you don't want to really. I don't want to pick up a phone call from anybody. That's a great resource. I also love this lady on TikTok. She has a lot of great content. Selena Rizvani. She's not a girl bossy TikToker, which I like. I think the market's oversaturated. She gives really great, here are some phrases you can use, terms you should use when in different stages in the employee life cycle. So it's really helpful. And then I put headspace because sometimes when people message you, it can come off, it can really, I'll portray it a different way. Like maybe it's more, I think it's more aggressive or irritating. Headspace has a lot of great meditations that are like 2 to 3 minutes long that I use just to focus my breathing before I sit down and actually respond to that. Because it takes away a lot of my aggression. I'm going to use way less exclamation marks and I have a more clear level head when I go. So thank you everybody for having me here. I appreciate it so much. Feel free to connect with me. We have a lot of great open tech opportunities at Cerkl too. But instead of it, I'm sure we have a couple questions, but I also would kind of like to just hear from the group on, did something pop up when that conversation was going on that wasn't listed that you think would be something you want to change?
Feel free to come off of mute if anyone has any responses. But for myself, I started thinking about, I guess, responding with emojis instead of responding with words, which is something that sometimes I can't find the right word. So I'll just like give a thumbs up instead of actually like saying what I mean. But it wasn't covered in there, but things started clicking for me. So.
Yeah, that's a good one, Alex. I do the same exact thing. Like somebody will say something and it's like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Thumbs up. So I agree.
If it makes you feel any better, I do that on actual voice calls when I don't know what to say to people. I just go and hope that the conversation's over. So.
I usually draft a Slack message and then I have to go through and delete the I thinks and all the justs I use just a lot, and I realized like that's not adding anything, and I just did it there. You heard it.
Just is a really big one. I had a friend send me a tweet yesterday about just that made me one, bang my head against the table, but two, I just couldn't stop giggling. And it's, ladies, don't forget to take just out of your email. It undermines your power, but that's just my opinion. Feel free to ignore.
So that's so true.
Totally. It's just as rampant. That's a great tactic though, Stephanie, is to write it out before you send it and then pre-edit it. That's great.
So I thought this was a great presentation, and it got me thinking about, I think we've got like yearly goals and things like that, like manager one-on-ones coming up, and just how to have those conversations and being, how have you done so far in the last quarter, and asserting like more I conversation than we as a team, right? Like when you're having those one-on-one conversations, what did I do? What did I accomplish? How did I, promote and help and move the team forward, rather than we as a team, like moving forward. So I thought you had a lot of great ideas of how to kind of frame those as I'm kind of coming up with those in my company. So thank you.
That's really awesome to hear. That's actually something I'll take away from you, Jillian, is I do that a lot. I'm a team of one and I still use we way more than I should. So that's a great tactic and I'm glad it helped. But yeah. Thank you guys. Oh, I did the thumbs up. Yep, I did it. I did it right away. Didn't even register. So,
we do have two questions in
oh,
the
sure.
chat.
Yeah.
So the first one is, which Pokemon do you most identify with?
That's a great question. When making this presentation this past weekend, I was inspired by Pokemon because I didn't want to do another Darwin evolution like reference. And so I thought, what's a better way to evolve? And I played Pokemon Go for like 2 months, and that's my limited amount of knowledge with Pokemon. But this past weekend, I went wild, finding the weirdest the weirdest Pokemon out there. I personally, I'm gonna sound so basic saying it, but I love Bulbasaur. Just think he just gets so mad. All of his gifts were very like, he gets angry and grumpy, and I just really liked that about him. And I think that is me when I'm not speaking at an engagement.
Nice. Okay, and then the second question is, what if you enter an emoji culture? Are you obligated to also emoji?
So Cerkl has a pretty big emoji culture. I guess I wonder if is it cool to just respond via emoji? Because I do that when I'm way too busy and it just needs to be acknowledged that I saw this message. Then I usually just do a thumbs up, or, if sometimes I'll feel funky and do like a robot, like, I don't know, I just want to show you that I saw this message. But when it comes to messaging back and forth, I often don't use emojis unless it's if I'm messaging more of a coworker buddy, and then we're just kind of going back and forth with some weird emojis. Like I think I've pulled out 1 or 2 really rare emojis with Rachel once or twice, and then created emojis in other cases because I thought it would be, timely. But emojis are a great way to have fun. But when it comes to, you're trying to be professional and you are trying to come across, you want to show that you are in charge. I normally stray away from emoji use, but clearly not GIF use, because I think that's a different ballgame. Great question. Oh man, I almost did it again. It's off camera, but I literally just did this and you can see it off camera. Oof.
Nice. It's gonna be a hard one to break.
I'm gonna get like a spray bottle.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you guys.
And that brings us to our final talk of the night, from Megan James, a software engineer at P&G. So for a few months, Megan was engaged as an independent tech consultant, primarily being leveraged to do some work on a WordPress site. With limited or zero WordPress experience, she promised to learn and support the best that she could. Come listen as she shares her key learnings, takeaways, and a few hilarious failings as well. All right.
All right, share my screen here. Maybe not like a thumbs up if you can see it, just like a knowing nod of acknowledgement. Like, yes, Megan, we can see your screen and we don't thumbs up anymore here. Cool. So
I don't see your screen.
You do not see my screen.
Nah.
Cool, try again. How about now?
Yep.
Great, thanks. So I'm Megan James, and I promised Sandy that I would talk about being a WordPress consultant. I think what I left out until I sent her my bio about this talk was that my experience with being a WordPress consultant is very limited and sort of comical. So that's what I'm here to bring you today. My origin story on this is like my career trajectory. So I actually have a background as a teacher. I was a middle school and high school science teacher, and somewhere along the way, I transitioned from teaching in the classroom to teaching other teachers how to teach in the classroom. I became like an educational consultant for a while. So I had some experience in consulting. I was consulting for a larger company at the time, but I was managing my own contracts. I was managing my own clients. So I had some experience with consultation before I came to the world of IT. And I actually am relatively new to the world of tech. I did a boot camp last fall. So I've been a little over a year now post boot camp working at P&G, as I sort of worked on the like product manager side of things for a while and then transitioned more to an engineering role. And now I work full time at P&G as an engineer. But I also picked up this sort of side hustle, I guess you could call it, as a WordPress consultant while I was sort of in my apprenticeship at P&G. And that is what I wanted to share with you, sort of my experience with that, some big learnings and key takeaways I had, if any of you have ever been curious about what it might be like. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking to yourself, one does not accidentally consult, right? Like you don't just show up and start doing work and then just magically get paid. How this happened for me, and I think how it happens to quite a few other people, is I know a really busy independent contractor. I happen to be related to that busy independent contractor. My sister a few years ago started her own business, and her primary focus was in email and social media marketing. But along the way, she just sort of came upon these jobs where people wanted that, but they also wanted a little bit of technical savvy. And she was trying to unload some of these more technical projects on somebody else who might be motivated to do it. And since I was really like in learning mode at the time, I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to learn a little bit about a different tech stack that I was working on at work, and also just like dabble in the consulting world. When I first talked to the company that I ended up doing this job for, they had three like high level objectives. They wanted me to maintain a site that was already created. I think they had paid somebody else to develop this WordPress site for them, but they didn't really have anybody internal with the technical skill to maintain it and then also do some updates. There were a lot of plugins used, and so there was a lot of updating to be done. And they didn't want to have to take that on as an extra added job responsibility. The company that I work with They're definitely more of like a small business startup type feel. So everybody wears a lot of hats, and just nobody wanted this hat. No one wanted the WordPress hat. So they also had a couple ideas for things that they wanted to implement new on the site, and they knew that that was going to be outside of anyone's wheelhouse. And they said, you know, we want somebody technical to come help us with this stuff. So I talked to my sister and said, okay, no problem. Let's just let them know. Like, I have very limited experience in WordPress, and we can just like use their test site, and I can play around and get these new features implemented for them. And my sister, I still quote her on this to this day, but she said, it's the Wild West out here, Megan. There is no test site. They just deploy everything right to that production site. They just cross their fingers and hope that it goes well. And I didn't really know how to respond to that. I think being so new to tech, I just only had this one like very corporate enterprise experience of how things were done. And it made no sense to me that anywhere in the world would exist any sort of website or application that you would be like live making changes to. That just seemed really scary and stressful to me. So after I internalized that, I moved forward with my consulting experience, and it was not really, it did not turn out to be what I thought it was going to be. I definitely thought that I would be working with a lot of code. I was like, I think the underbelly of WordPress is PHP, so I'm probably going to have to learn some new syntax and maybe some new frameworks. And so I'm going to be very like hands-on keyboard with this. I'm going to make a little spare change, which will be, you know, great when you're making that apprentice pay. It's really nice to have a side hustle to be bringing that extra change in. I thought that I was going to be just moving mountains on this website, making these really great, meaningful improvements. And, you know, overall, it's just going to be like fireworks. Like my life was going to be lit up in my free time working as this WordPress consultant. And what it turned out to be was me reading a lot of documentation, like all the documentation for all of the plugins, all of the add-ons from the web host, just all the documentation that I could find for what had already been pre-built there. That took a lot of time. So the return on investment monetarily was not quite as great as I had hoped, maybe closer to pennies than actual dollar bills. And there, instead of like me making these big, huge improvements, there was very small incremental growth and also just like a lot of breakage. And then finally, it was less fireworks and a lot more sending emails. I knew as a consultant back in my independent educational consulting days, I did a lot of communication back and forth with clients via email because I wasn't always accessible to them. But I think because I was a technical person speaking to non-technical people, it added an extra layer of communication, which is sort of what I wanted to get into with my big wins and then also my lessons learned. So my big wins were, I definitely did learn about WordPress. I would not characterize myself as being all-knowing about WordPress, but I certainly would not be afraid to have somebody hand over some WordPress access credentials and some files. I would know loosely how to approach that situation. It's no longer foreign territory to me, which is great. I also absolutely improved for the client that I worked with. I improved the development process for their website greatly. I did manage to get a test site up and running for them and add some documentation that was unique to what was actually on their site instead of stock documentation about the plugins that we had made many configuration changes to. So I did that. I also was able then to establish a little credibility outside of my like one IT experience. So outside of P&G, I also now have another company who would say like, yes, this person can do technical things. So that's a win. And then also from a business side of things, I really learned how important a statement of work is, an SOW. In my current position at P&G, we do work with an external vendor. And so I was familiar with the process of having to receive a statement of work and work on that with the vendor to sort of hash out what was expected to happen, what the deliverables might be, what the personnel on the project might be. But the statement of work became incredibly important to me as the contractor because it helped me to work with the client to really define what tasks we were trying to accomplish and what was the time frame for those tasks. So things that I think that you can learn from my experience working as a WordPress consultant is first and foremost, get really, really clear on requirements as early in the project as possible. And you have to figure out who the internal owners in whatever business you're working with, who are the owners of the pieces that you're going to have some dependency on. In my case, one of the things that this company wanted me to do was to update the inventory on their site, and they used some plugins to manage their inventory. Nobody was really clear about how any of it worked. And I later learned that they didn't really have an actual inventory. I imagined someone was just going to give me a spreadsheet and I would just be able to do whatever magic I needed to do in Python or whatever to manipulate that data and then, get it to a format that the plugin liked. But that was not the case. There was no Excel spreadsheet. So I had to work with them to build something that I then had to manipulate. There's just a lot of people involved that I didn't know about ahead of time. And had I sat down early in the process and gone a little bit more into detail on the requirements, I think that we could have made that process go a little bit faster. So that was one thing that I learned. Another was just time boxing tasks. So making sure that if I'm going to take on manipulating a spreadsheet with some Python, then I expect that this is going to take me 2 hours tops. I know what I'm billing for, or I know what the timeline is and what I'm being paid and what I value my hour rate to be. And I need to make sure that this task stays within that time box. And if for some reason it's going outside that time box, I need to do a hard stop, evaluate why that is, and then potentially go back and say, this is why this is taking so long. Maybe we need to have a conversation or change the approach. Don't just give your time away for free. I think that was an important lesson for me to learn. Also, a handy tip, if you're working in WordPress and you have to use the plugins, that the client has already sort of set up, I found it very rewarding to reach out directly to the people who wrote that code and get their take on how to fix problems, especially if there are some gaps in the documentation. There were 2 instances where I felt like I had a very specific question about why a plugin was acting a certain way, and I was able to reach out directly to the listed contacts for that plugin and find out why it was acting that way. So that saved me a ton of time. And I was a technical enough person that they could have a conversation with me and I could translate that to fix that piece of the site. Also, this particular client was using a web host, and that service that they were paying for also came with many other services that they didn't know about. They just assumed I'm paying this web host to host my website, and that's the end of the relationship. But actually, that web host is backing up your WordPress database. That web host will automatically build a test site for you. That web host will do a lot of things. And it's just all part of like the WordPress package. So if you don't understand what you're paying for, you're probably paying more money than the value that you're actually taking. So learning a little bit about what the web host actually offered and what was being paid for as part of the technical infrastructure was really helpful to me. And that helped me leave something behind for them. Let's take advantage of the thing you're already paying for. I'll do the background setup with the vendor, and then you'll be good to go. And then finally, just document the heck out of everything. At the end of this project, we had accomplished 2 of the 3 deliverables that were outlined in the statement of work. And I had some emails going back and forth about why the 3rd deliverable just wasn't going to happen. Somebody on the internal business team was sort of dragging their feet because of some other background processes. And I had documentation of that. And I also had documentation for how to complete the task if you're a non-technical person. So even though I couldn't be there to implement it for them, I had the documentation they needed to do it themselves once I was gone. And so that served as sort of my 3rd deliverable to close out the statement of work and say, like, in good conscience, I've done everything that I can to meet your deadlines, to offer these deliverables, and here's what you need to get it across the finish line. If you need me again, let me know and we can write up another statement of work. So there were no hard feelings at the end of that. We all felt like we had accomplished most of what we set out to do, and there were good reasons for why some things weren't accomplished. Also, as a side note, another thing that I learned in my foray into WordPress documentation is make sure if you ever get your hands on any of these WordPress sites, do the client a big favor and turn off auto updates. Thankfully, somebody that came before me had disabled auto updates on one particular piece of the site. Everything else was updating itself, which is just scary, right? Like your production site is up, and then just on any whim, any person can update their plugin, and that will automatically be updated on your production site. And if all those plugins interact with each other, and so if there's any bad interaction, it can ruin your day. So do everyone a favor, turn off those auto updates, start yourself a test site. Probably if you're paying a web host, they'll spin one up for you. That's an exact replica of what you already have. And then you can run the updates yourself one by one to find out what's going to break and what's not going to break. So that was a bit of knowledge that I passed on. So I have a legacy with this company now. So that was my experience as a WordPress consultant. That statement of work has since ended, but I have been reached out by that company again, and they would like me to check in with them in February or March to see who they have hired and if they still have technical needs. So I would say that ultimately it was a success. I learned a little about WordPress. I learned a little bit more about consulting, and I learned a lot about what it means to be a technical person in a non-technical space. And I'm glad to have had the experience. So happy to answer any questions you might have. I'll pull us back to the gallery view so I can see all your faces.
Great talk, Megan. It was great to hear about, like, I've never done a WordPress site, but it was great to hear like some watch outs and that certain things are included already by default. So hopefully in the future, if I have to, I'll be able to call on that knowledge. We do have one question, yes, so far. So it comes from Sandy. Any recommendations on how often to review or update plugins for a WordPress site?
Well, Sandy, I'm so glad you asked. I don't actually have any like great direction on that, but I can tell you what I did and what I noticed. What I noticed is that many plugins update frequently. They must be running these agile teams, like pushing out updates all the time. I would feel like I had just gotten rid of all of the possible updates. Either I had said yes, update, or no, don't update. And then I would have 6 more notifications the next day, just like, oh, these updates. So I think a decent cadence, depending on like how integral that plugin is to the site, a decent cadence would be like an every 2 week or a monthly update, especially in the case of the site that I was maintaining. It was a very small piece of the overall business. So it wasn't their main website. I think that's why they built it in WordPress and just sort of left it unmanaged. They just needed a place to sell some stuff. So they made this e-commerce site and then just left it to die on a hill. But I do know that some WordPress sites have some plugins that are like really integral to the functionality. For example, like WooCommerce is a big plugin that e-commerce WordPress sites use. It's an inventory management tool. And I would wonder, especially if you're using the piece of WooCommerce that handles payment, I would be worried if I wasn't regularly updating that plugin, because I'm assuming that if it's a plugin that handles payment or helps you handle payment, then there might be some issues. There might be some patching that's going on, and that's coming out in those updates. And you don't want to expose consumers to, you know, having bad experiences with their information, identities being stolen. So I think it might depend on what the plugin is. And in one case, a theme that was installed on the site that I was managing had gone so long without being updated that when I went to update it, just everything broke. Everything broke. And I was reading all of this documentation, trying to figure it out. And I just decided, like, it's a theme. Currently, we're happy with the aesthetics of the site. So we're just going to not update this. Because I don't think you want to pay me to fix this. I think it's going to cost you too much money. It's not going to give you a good return on investment. So developing a good relationship with the people that you're working with to try to assess, like, what are their priorities, and then also trying to give your best recommendation as somebody who can read and understand technical documentation enough to, you know, help them assess risk. I think that's the sweet spot. So not a short, sweet answer, but that was my experience. Would I do more WordPress work if the opportunity presented itself? For this particular company, probably yes. Mostly because I like know the main players now. I would know who to go to try to shorten the amount of time it takes us to get things across the finish line. I didn't hate it. I would actually be sort of interested to do work on a WordPress site that wasn't constructed only of like plug and play things. I think there's a lot of stuff under the hood of WordPress that is really interesting. And there's a huge community, right? Like WordPress was a thing before I had a computer, probably. So I think there's a really rich WordPress community, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to be learned just from interacting with that community online. So I think that I would take certain opportunities. I just might be a little bit picky. And I think at some point, if I were like an independent WordPress consultant and that's all I did, I think I'd spend most of my time working in this e-commerce space where you start to encounter sites that use the same plugins and the same formats. I think I might get a little bored with that. But if somebody has some real cool WordPress stuff that's a little outside the box, I think I'd be interested in seeing that.
Any other questions for Megan?
I didn't include this in my presentation, and nobody's asked a question about it, but if there's anybody here who's interested in getting into independent consulting, the two things that were the most helpful for me were knowing somebody who already does it, who could share with me some, like, I got an example statement of work, and I got some like example stuff for like how you handle some of the tax implications of that. So that was really useful, just having somebody guide me on that. And then also, if you work for another company, like if that's not going to be your only gig, definitely talk to somebody at the company who maybe has a side hustle, because for sure at P&G, and I'm sure at many other places, there are requirements about like you disclosing what other things you're doing. Conflict of interest can come about. So talking to somebody who's navigated that before can also be helpful, especially if you're working for a big company.
Awesome. I guess with that, that will wrap up our night. So thank you, Megan. Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Amber, as well, for your presentations. We learned a lot. I'm going to go ahead and end our recording if I can find it.